So in a state of emergency, as much of the democratic process as possible must be preserved. Philosophical policy advice focuses as ethics on the quality of reasons or actions or goals of political institutions or people. In this acceptability check, there are several sub-criteria, principles I would like to mention, but in this short talk I only would like to talk about the functionality and dysfunctionality of institutions. There are other principles like contributive or distributed justice, or for example, respect for autonomy, reasonableness, or ethical standards of decision making under uncertainty, contextuality and appropriateness, and ethical responsiveness. And that is also a term from social science, but we have to deal with the fear, also with the irrational fear of people and take it serious. And we have to do an analysis about that. So the measures to reduce the infection rate of the COVID-19 pandemic are institutionally prescribed for each country. The associated risk-consequence discourse about a special non-standard situation refers to the importance of reflecting on institutional ethical types of theory and the limits of individualistic ethics of responsibility. The controversial discussion regarding the depth of intervention in personal, economic and entrepreneurial autonomy in the corona crisis underlines the central function of philosophical ethics, the theoretical reflection of morality and moralities. So, and maybe I can upload a little meme. I'll try it because, maybe I'll send you later. I'm not so experienced in Google meetings, but there's a meme which deals with this topic. Okay, I try it later. Institutions I define as organizations. Rules, norms and conventions of the everyday life are constitutive elements of institutions. Institutions are constitutive elements of societies and cultures. For example, a government I call a meta-institution because it organizes other organizations and institutions. So, and when we talk about institutions, they have special elements and character. For example, they have a history and they have an open future, an open-ended future. They are dynamic. For example, they have a certain narration, they have a personal taste. If you think about the government of Churchill, then you have not a normal British government, you have the British government of Winston Churchill. So, and because of that, there is a formal side and an informal side of institutions. And the informal side you can call the spirit of institution, the institutional character. And in democracy, we have a democratic character of institution. And that's important because we have talked about that this informal side, the democratic character of organizations, institutions, should not be ended in the emergency state. It should be preserved, the informal side. So, in my opinion, non-reflected inconsistencies are a sign of dysfunctionality of institutions or support a process of becoming dysfunctional. Because the informal side has a democratic character and it depends and interacts with a democratic way of life. You cannot split it up. It's interdependent. And the inconsistencies are the most problem. They are not ambiguity and something good we enjoy in democracy, The inconsistencies are the place for extremists or enemies of democracy who can take them as arguments, and they are in some aspects correct arguments. So, and if we want to defend democratic institutions, we have to cope honestly with the inconsistencies of institutions. So institutional action is understood as supra-individual action. The difference to individualistic types of ethics can be illustrated with the terminology of game theory. In the former, the implementation of moral norms is incumbent on the motivational decision-making preferences to the individual. In institutional ethics, on the other hand, the rules of the game are focused as framework conditions. The ethical norms inscribed in the rules of the game are binding for everyone involved in the institutions. An acceptability test to be carried out must assess whether the relevant institutions can be regarded as functional and appropriate to the context. Dysfunctional institutions that are historically obsolete with regard to technical progress, for example, or have colonized other contexts of action that are beyond their own capabilities, are ethically unacceptable. This issue becomes more explosive if German and Austrian courts declare the government's measures to contain the pandemic to be inadmissible. And when the actors involved are of the opinion that regulatory measures associated with containing the pandemic are unlawful, inconsistent, paternalistic interventions, regulations, or bans. In order to take the place of populism and protect and correct democratic institutions, it is necessary to face inconsistencies transparently and honestly. In the following, I would like to discuss a few examples of inconsistencies that make institutions dysfunctional or that can be interpreted as a sign of dysfunction. For example, due to the predecessor types of the coronavirus, SARS and MERS and all the other types, the state governments, in the sense of a major institution, had no of corresponding crisis logistics since 2004. One of the main criticisms of the dysfunctional government institutions is that the government implemented the crisis plans far too late. For example, closing big international airports. For example, quarantine measures for travelers from corona hotspots. In Germany, many people came from Iran, where Iran had been a corona hotspot. So, and there were no checkups at the airport, for example. That I only want to show some examples. I do not want to say that these examples are totally valid and true and whatever, but this is a discussion about inconsistency. Many fundamental rights are temporarily suspended in a state of emergency. For example, despite a constitutionally guaranteed occupational freedom, there are temporary occupational bans. The question of proportionality touches on the issue of distributive justice. Which professional group is supported to what extent in the crisis, and for what reasons enjoys the largest exception? For example, football, soccer profis can continue their work, no problem. Sports, the professional sports can continue, but the amateur sport is forbidden or much restricted. In terms of terminology, this is a criticism of terminology. Institutions must communicate consistently and transparently. International comparability must also be established in terms of language. Whether the patient died from or with corona is a major difference. A difference that had only gradually made it into the public consciousness of the debates. The population perceives inconsistencies more precisely than politicians and scientists would like to admit. The differentiation on or with was immediately standard in the public communication of the relevant institution for the vaccine. The development of the vaccine received massive financial support from the government in Germany. 750 million of euros. Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca are selling the vaccine at cost. Pfizer has turned down government funding from the US government. The partner of Pfizer, BioNTech, passes its products, like Pfizer, on the general public at profit. But BioNTech got the subvention from the state, the financial support from the state, and they are selling the product with profit. Pfizer don't sell it with profit. They sell the vaccine at cost. It's a big difference. So it should be considered whether a profit taking that is not regulated by the state is ethically legitimate, because the development of the vaccine has only been made possible to this extent by the general public. Companies that do not sell their vaccine at cost in spite of government subsidies should be forced to sell at cost or ultimately partially socialized. The production and distribution must be internationally regulated. Institutions always refer to roles and rules. Individuals in leading positions can, however, shape institutions personally. In Germany, for example, federalism plays an important role in combating the corona pandemic. The heads of government of the federal states can try to distinguish themselves. This circumstance should be prevented in the sense of the functionality of institutions. For example, in hard coal mining, there is a central mine rescue team in case of an emergency, which takes over the direct management of all affected mines, regardless of all hierarchies. One of my last theses, and then I'm finished. Beginning and ending human life must be allowed to be accompanied by relatives and loved ones. Sick or old people in particular can fail because of the formal predisposition for assessed right to visit the relatives. The possible dismantling of intensive care beds is a controversial issue. Corona patients require more staff than the average intensive care patient. If the government, for example, urgently warned against overloading the intensive care units, then an increasing and continued economization of the clinics and a reduction in staff would be ethically unacceptable. In addition, operations on seriously ill patients have to be postponed because of the corona pandemic. For example, cancer patients suffer from immense psychological pressure, so that the postponing a necessary operation due to a lack of human and special resources is absolutely unacceptable from an ethical point of view. There is an inconsistency in the proportionality of other crises in financial participation. In our discussion, we have heard it today in a little way. Global hunger crisis, hospital germs, child poverty, etc. There are other crises as well, and there is no money, there is no lockdown. It is not in a proportional relation. There's also no democratic weighing up the damage between the consequences of the lockdown and the corona pandemic. For example, with the climate change, on the other hand, weighing is already done, for example, with regard to jobs. There must be proportionality in terms of work areas. In industry, Work can continue despite Corona, for example, in the automotive industry. Who decides the importance of which professional group? So that's my plaidoyer for an acceptability test and for an interdisciplinary roadmap in a risk